Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. We're going to kick off today with a special selection, which is where one of you tell me exactly what it is I need to check out. Today's special selection comes at us from Sean. Would love for you to check out Mayhem, Illuminate Eliminate. You've tried an old track of Mayhem's, but this is them at their most experimental and odd. You'll probably hate the production, but I feel like it was recorded in a coffin, claustrophobic, and muddy. Expect jazzy rides, throat singing, and just madness. So let's get into this. Mayhem's Illuminate Eliminate from their 2007 album. Let's dive in and see what's going on. I mean, it certainly paints a very specific picture. It's interesting too because there's a lot of elements here that tell me black metal, but they're really taking your time, and to me black metal isn't really patient genre, and I find that to be the most interesting thing so far. shift in there, but it's so hard to tell. I turned it up just a hair, hoping it might help, and it actually made it muddier. It's interesting though, the low fidelity production isn't really applied to the vocals. They got this vocal track in reverse, don't they? This section right here. That was a pretty slick. Yeah, the cymbal work is really nice right here. There's some odd meter going on in there too. But we're back to 4/4. They play around with offbeat accents, make it feel like it's an odd meter, but it is 4/4. The offbeat guitar here, it's a little strange, but the atmosphere here is well done. See, like, this rising intensity here, I feel like it's held back by the production. I mean, you guys knew I was going to say that, but I do. As much as I don't typically like black metal, and I'll say that even if this was produced more cleanly, there's a lot of elements that are very frictional for me. I still think there's a really interesting song underneath the production here. Subjectively speaking, I think we could achieve a similar-ish production. We can keep, sorry, not production, a similar-ish atmosphere. We can keep some of the eeriness, the tension, the weight of some of these sections. I don't know if I said eeriness, but yes, definitely has some eerie moments to it. It has this creeping component to all of it. We can achieve that with a higher fidelity production. Now, as I said, this is very subjective. It completely changes the feeling and sound of the song. All right, we're talking about changing the sonic identity here. I'm not saying that this would improve it, but we could retain most of the emotion they're going for with a higher fidelity production, and I think that actually would create something that would be less of a hurdle for people to get into. There's actually not a lot of abrasive elements to this. It is, there's still some metal stuff, it is still an acquired taste, but I feel like a lot of the hurdle for this is the production. The fact that it sounds, as was described, like it was recorded in a coffin. It's just, the acoustics aren't great. The mixing of everything is not typical. But I do think there are some interesting ideas in here. And I think that they could shine, and some of them could even shine brighter. Probably the wrong term for black metal. Shine brighter. This could have been a brighter track. No. They could have excelled though, I think, with stronger production. Right there at the end, we hit the loudest part of the song. It's where the song was building up towards those final 40 seconds or so, and they just lacked impact. More subjectively speaking, of course, they purposefully did it this way, I assume, for some reason or another, but in a way of speaking, the ideas here are solid, the execution left me wanting. And, I mean, it really depends on intent here. Normally, I would say that an artist doesn't want that to happen. They don't want someone to walk away and said, it could have been better. But I think that a lot of, especially metal in general, but more specifically black metal, I feel like this music is really made for the bands and their fans. I don't think Mayhem cares if I walk away from this not really enjoying the production of it, thinking that it could have been better if they had went for more high fidelity production on it. So, that's why I keep bringing up the subjectivity component. But I do think that if another band were to accomplish this or attempt this, they might be a bit more tempted to do a different production style. And I do think I'd be a bit more interested in that. Again, there's some solid ideas here on paper. A lot of stuff I'm not sold on, but atmospherically, I think they have a really solid foundation here. It just never really clicks with me because of how that foundation is delivered to my ears. Now, I think that's my major criticism here. As I mentioned, there's a lot of stuff that doesn't really click with me. The vocals are not really my cup of tea. Some of the sections might have been okay if I could hear what was going on, but the production making them super muddy made it difficult for me. There's some guitar sections. There's that barely audible vocal crack that comes right on top of some fry that just absolutely I don't think really worked. Uh, yeah, there's some stuff in here that was not for me. I think I'm going to avoid talking about any of that. The production, I think, is an important aspect because it hides, possibly intentionally, some really strong elements. But anything else that I would criticize would be entirely just from the point of view of I didn't enjoy it, and I don't think that that's too fruitful of a conversation for this track, especially given that there are a few things I want to highlight while we're talking about it. So, no point in wasting time on things that I don't think have any larger purpose. One of the things I think they excelled at, as I mentioned, is atmosphere. It's palpable from the very beginning. A lot of it does come off through the guitar harmonies. But there are some sections, some ideas that add to the atmosphere entirely by timbre, the sound of things. As I mentioned, that one sound I'm not too keen on was that barely audible vocal sound. Feels like it's cracked. It's got a little bit of fry to it. It's just like it's barely audible. It's like just barely getting the vocal cords to produce sound. Um, Except his was like super high pitch. I don't know how he does that. It almost sounded, excuse the description here, it almost sounded like he was being strangled. And this was like the squeak that was coming out, right? There's a lot of, well, to me, it sounds like there's a lot of constriction. I have no idea how safe the vocal technique is. Not my place to talk about it. But that's what it sounds like to me. There's a lot of constriction going on. And, yeah, like I said, I did not like that. But it did add to the atmosphere. It sounded like a creaking door that just kept opening. Like a creaking revolving door. It just never had a point of stopping. It was just constant squeak. And I mean it adds to the atmosphere a little bit. The way that the guitars sound, the muffledness of them do add to an atmosphere. Uh, as much as I'm not a fan of the way this sounded, as much as I think we could have achieved a similar vibe with stronger production, I still think that they achieved what they wanted to with this production, and it was effective to a level. It wasn't super effective for me, but I do think that they achieved this creeping, eerie element, and part of that has to be the sound of it. Um, and black metal's just really good at atmosphere, and I think this is a great song to showcase some of that. This seems like a band who, at least for this track, isn't specifically doing this type of production because that's what their inspirations did, because that's the kind of music they like to listen to. It really feels like it's thematically appropriate, which is the best thing you can do, at least in my eyes, if you're going to do production like this, is make it relevant. If it's a sound you like, I'm not going to hold that against you. You just want to make something that sounds good to your ears. But I am probably not going to have good remarks for it. It doesn't sound good to me, and I tend to prefer some sort of, it's like harsh vocals, like the really extreme harsh vocals that I'm not a fan of. I can walk away from those being like, that wasn't my cup of tea, but it lined up with the lyrics in a way that just worked perfectly, right? The artistic vision, I think, can add a level of appreciation for me to something I don't enjoy. And that's something that I want, that I'm commenting on here. Now, I was described that this was a wild ride of madness full of jazzy sections and throat singing. I don't want to say I was led astray. I don't want to say that the requester was wrong, but I certainly had something different in mind. We've listened to jazzy black metal. It typically goes into the experimental or avant-garde side of the black metal umbrella. And so I was expecting something not this. To be fair, I didn't really pick up any jazzy sections at all. There were some sections with swingier grooves, which I thought was interesting in black metal since I typically associate more of a rigidity to the rhythmic cadence. But there were some places with syncopated groove to them that I think could be called swingy, but there was nothing in here that I personally would classify as jazzy. But just the sheer idea of having some rhythmic syncopation in a black metal track, I suppose, is very different and fairly jazzy for the genre, if we put that qualifier on the end. But I did appreciate, again, the rhythmic side of things and some of the different elements they went into. We didn't just have dynamics on the rhythmic side, we also had dynamics on the metric side. There were a few sections in here, not many, where they went into bonkers time signatures. Ones that were so strange, I didn't pick up on them. I called out most of the times we returned to a 4/4. I don't think I nailed any of the actual odd time signatures we went into. Part of that, I'm just gonna boost my ego a little bit here. You know, if my head's too big, let me know. Part of that is the sections that we went into that had an odd time signature. By the time I noticed something was a little up, something was a little odd, we were already out of it. They didn't stick around with them for too long. There was one closer to the end, about 6 or 7 minutes in, that we stuck around with for 4 repetitions, which is not a lot, but it should be enough for me, and they stumped me on it. We were in there long enough. I think I should have been able to nail it down, and I didn't. And what I think was happening there is we had some accented rhythms that were giving us a beat not on our pulse. We also had some crossing over of the bar where a phrase was not relegated just to the amount of beats in a bar. So if, hypothetically, we were in 4/4, this might have been a 5-beat phrase. So the end of the phrase itself actually starts at the beginning of the next bar and it pushes everything forward. We would start on beat 1 for the first time around, start on beat 2 of the next bar the second time around, start on beat 3 of the next bar, and so forth until we line back up starting on beat 1 again. And we weren't in 4/4, so there's 3 things going on which really muddy up the general pulse of the section. And that's, the more metric changes you make to an idea, the harder it is to pick up. I mean, I think that just makes sense. But I do think that they're multiplicatively compounding, where each layer makes it that much more difficult. It isn't just like, oh, this is 3 layers of difficulty. It's like 3 layers now makes it like 5 times harder to figure out. um, so I'm kind of curious. I might end up going back to that section again after I finish this video and seeing if I can't figure it out. Being able to, loop that section over and over. But they did play around with meter and rhythm and phrasing in some interesting ways that created some, not cacophonous, chaotic bits. Speaking of cacophony, which I think is why I said that word, there were certainly some sections in here that went into tons of sound, wall of sound even maybe. Particularly 16th note bass kicks and something on the guitars and maybe some vocal work. Due to the production, again, the bass kicks really muddy everything up, and I think when they're more spacious, going for more of a rock type of drum pattern, they don't make a mess of everything. It's muddy enough that it kind of gives that dirty, gritty production, but it doesn't really take over much. But when the bass kicks are just constant, and it's like splashing in a puddle you just can't see the reflection anymore. It's just waves and ripples and splashes and water drops, and that's exactly what happens here. So I'm not entirely sure what goes on in these moments, but they are big, they are loud, they are wall of soundy, and at one point I tried to turn the volume up because usually with volume comes clarity, and I try to balance this because I want to save my ears, right? I'm only 30 something. I don't know. I'm aging up soon, but honestly, I don't know what age I'm going to. So that's kind of bad. I'm losing track of time these days. I am rambling. Let's get back on track. Um, yeah, I tried to turn the volume up a little bit because usually that adds some clarity, and I wanted some clarity in this section. And honestly, I think it made it muddier. It was the strangest thing. Um, but yeah, so they can get loud and aggressive and frictionless when it comes to attacks, going for more of that traditional black metal thrashiness when they want to. And I think it's interesting that they chose so rarely to do that. It allows those moments to stand out, not just because the rhythmic idea is isolated to these. Usually we have these longer held out notes, atmospheric stuff, the drums are a bit more reserved, and then we have this just cacophony of 16th notes, right? But also because it creates a muddiness here. It's not just all of the notes, it's the wall of sound it creates, it's the raw impact. Those moments when they went for that sound stand out to me as punctuation in the song. It's a moment of saying, this is different. And so, for once in a black metal track, I really like those moments of the rigid 16th notes, no accents, just, wall of sound stuff, because it isn't the main mode that the song is composed in. It stands as an outlier, and through that, it calls attention to itself, and it makes me think about it not just as a section, but how it connects to what came before it, how it connects to what came after it, its position in the larger work itself. I don't know what it all means. Maybe when we hit the lyrics, something might come from that, but it is a quick moment. I mean, we never stuck with them for very long. They're quick moments of aggression, maybe of determination, having a goal and just gunning for it, right? There's no second guessing to it. That's the kind of feeling I get. There's eerie atmosphere. Everything's kind of creeping. Everything's slow paced. I talked about the patience of our intro. It took us like 2 minutes to get to anything metallic, even in sound. And then we hit these moments, and it's like we know where we're going, and we're getting there now. And it's just very determined compared to the bloated weight that the rest of the song has. And because of that, there's a real strong thematic and storytelling element to that moment in the music that I typically dislike in black metal, and here it's a highlight for me. And this is what I'm talking about earlier about thematic reasoning for choices. It's just really, it helps music to click with me if I can see a purpose to it other than this sounds cool. Because sometimes I'm certainly in the mood for cool music, but usually I'm not. I want to be told a story with my music, which I guess is just something that comes from my background. Classical and jazz are both really big on telling stories with music. One pre-composed and one on the fly, improvisational, but they're both, to me, storytelling musics. And I think that's been one of, I don't know why that never clicked with me. Like, that makes sense. I have an issue getting into riff-based metal music. That's been something I've talked about for so long, and it's because they're not really storytelling. It makes an atmosphere and then loops it because it sounds cool. I mean, that's not the whole story. There are some things I like that are just cool sounding, and I can listen to them whenever I want, but generally speaking, I gravitate more towards narrative music. Huh. Anyways, we're gonna hit some lyrics here because I think that's pretty much everything I wanted to talk about. Most of the highlights, what I think they're doing good within the genre, and my little criticism on the production. Let's hit those lyrics. And a little content warning here. This is about somebody who is done with life. I don't. It kind of like teeters on that suicidal range. It's also misanthropic, so like these are just, if this isn't your cup of tea, I mean, after this, I'm just gonna wrap the video up, and if you're a longtime viewer, you know the whole ending, the whole outro thing, so you can probably just turn the video off at this point, if you're not interested in this. Weird for a YouTuber. It's like, no, I respect your time, and I don't care about my watch metrics. Like, I'm so bad at being a YouTuber. If you don't like what's going on, just leave. Ah, all right. So we have somebody who has finished everything they want to do with life. Now, granted, this is worded differently. He says there's nothing left to do, no other mission. Now, mission is, I think, is a really interesting word. I don't believe most people would refer to their life as a mission. Most people don't usually have missions in life. It's more of, it's your bucket list. It's things you want to do, not missions you'd like to complete. And I think the vocabulary there is very specific, and it applies to this whole feeling in a way that is distant for me. I'm not sure I can connect with it. But he says he's weak and devastated, that the strength has gone. He doesn't want to know anything else. He doesn't want to understand anything else. He feels lost and empty and wants to send the self back, which I think is a very interesting line. But just very done. And I think it depends. Like, how old were Mayhem when they made this? I'm guessing 20s, 30s. I'm hoping that this is less autobiographical and more narrative. Like maybe we're talking about an old man who is immortal, right? I think thematically this really works for that. If we're talking about like some 20 something who feels like they're done with life already, I'm a little less on board with this thing. Context, as usual, is very important. Um, So, like, if this is a vampire talking like this, that sounds fantastic. I'm really on board with this. I think it's great characterization. If it's not, and like I said, it's some 20-year-old, it kind of teeters into an area I'm less comfortable with. So I'm just throwing that out there. If I talk anything positively about this, which again is somebody who's ready for death, it's coming from a perspective, I think, of personifying someone who has seen too much already. Which I would, again, put onto somebody older, maybe granted immortality, or just maybe somebody like 90 years old and they're becoming frail and they've seen a lot and they're just kind of ready, right? But I do like that line, send the self back. I think it's interesting too because later on says that they have no faith in anything, which isn't necessarily specifically a religious faith. But because it's black metal, like religious elements, just I think of it immediately, right? Because black metal, Satanism, occultism, paganism, like there's a lot of religious elements in black metal, and so that's like something I immediately think of. And he's like setting himself back as if there is afterlife, another realm of being. But I suppose it can also be like send it back to space dust, stardust kind of vibe. Doesn't seem very black metal to go that angle, but I suppose that works as well. Anyways, I just like that. Send the self back. I like that line. Um, but yeah, so it's the last few lines though. It says, desperately alone, tired of this race. Again, the misanthrope kind of element there. I'm so tired of this race. Wide open and passing through. And that's it. So, again, I'm taking this from a little bit more of a artistic perspective. We have somebody who's weary and tired. They're worn out from existence and they're just ready to be done with it all. And I think that some of this music does line up with that. It is eerie, it is haunting. This is somebody who said they don't want to know anything else. It almost feels like they have too much knowledge, and it haunts them. That knowledge doesn't necessarily need to be, you know, statistics and information. It could just be knowledge of existence. You know, what if you have had your heart broken, not because someone left you, but because someone you loved has passed away? Think back to the idea of the tired vampire who no longer builds relationships with people because they've seen so many loved ones die. They've lived for thousands of years and they no longer even care for relationships or love because they know it will be a small moment in their life. Eventually, that person will die and they'll have to move on without them again, right? That kind of knowledge, the knowledge of experience, it's haunting, you know? And I think the music does a good job of solidifying that. I'd even say that the compression and low fidelity of this track work well within this context also. To be so beaten down by life that the world seems small. The edges of your world no longer connecting to anyone else, as he says at the end, so desperately alone, has come crushingly, has come into and has begun to crush him. He is socially and emotionally stuck in a small area. If there's a type of emotional claustrophobia, I think that this song captures that. Even the moment when we had that annoying squeaking door sound coming from the vocalist, it could represent just the lack of energy and drive to even sing, really personifying the vibe of our character here. I think it does ultimately end up working well. I'm not 100% sure that my read of the traditional black metal sections or the more chaotic time signatures play into this much at all. I don't really see much of the story being built through those, but the general atmosphere of this track does. The weight and slowness of everything. It took so long to get out of the intro, and for a weary traveler of the world, that makes sense. Now, again, if this isn't about a character, and if this is even just our vocalist thoughts, I am less appreciative of the narrative itself. Again, I think it's constructed well, it goes well with the music, but context is important. And there's definitely ways to use art to explore darker subjects. Um, and if the vocalist did feel like this when they wrote it, well, I hope they found something to help them through this, because these are very dark thoughts for somebody who I believe would have been young-ish while writing this. Um, those are my thoughts. Mayhem's Illuminate, Eliminate. That's a tongue twister. What are yours, though? Let me know your thoughts, perspectives, opinions, if you enjoyed it, anything you agree with me. Toss all that down in the description, in the comment section. Above the comments in the description box, you'll find a link to Linktree. It takes you here. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three. Alright, we have another video coming up next. We're doing all special selections this week, except tomorrow. We're going to do sounds from my inbox, as we always do. Trying to get through these. I have some things I need to learn about special selections, and I can't until we shore up the list a little bit. So we'll be doing a couple weeks of just special selections so I can get to that point. So that's what this week entails. Until next time, Remember, be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.